Emerging technologies both challenge and reward the financial services industry. With the advent of the Internet of Things, we've seen the development of new technologies, innovative applications, creative ways to solve problems, and the emergence of new opportunities that demand our attention. We've developed context-rich systems to respond to the new environment, adapting our use of analytics and intelligence. Innovations such as virtual currency may become some of the biggest disruptors in the history of IT. It's time to ask some big questions. How will this adaptive, smart approach affect the decision-making process? Our customers demand an always-on relationship. How do we meet their needs and provide continuous availability? How will we identify our customers? How will our customers identify us? Can we create an indisputable digital identity? How do we get ahead of ever more sophisticated cyber threats? Can we become more efficient by joining forces? How long can we hide inside the castle walls? It's time to find some big answers.
Good morning, everyone. They say you should always start with a joke. I suppose it's up to myself and my panel to prove that this is not what Swift is trying to do with the technology stream at Cybos this year. My name is Lawrence Freeborn. I'm a senior research analyst at IDC Financial Insights, and I have a great panel for you this morning. Allow me to introduce Susan Hui, Managing Director and Head of Group Technology Operations at United Overseas Bank. Susan manages over 4,000 staff across the region, including in Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and China. She leads a team that sets global standards for technology throughout UAB and for operational processes, building a robust and efficient operating platform that is scalable across the region. Susan chaired the Industry Steering Committee that oversaw the introduction of FAST, the country's immediate payment service. We have Stephen Muller, Group CEO, Divisional Board Member for Group Information Technology at Commerzbank. As Group CIO, Stephen is responsible for application engineering and IT production for the group. After completing his business management degree, he took on various responsibilities in Dresdner Bank's corporate banking division between 1994 and 2004, when he took on the position of CIO for retail and corporate banking. In the new Commerzbank, he was Divisional Board Member. He's also the chairperson of the national member group for Swift in Germany. And we have Rashik Parmar, lead IBM cloud advisor for Europe at IBM, also distinguished engineer, past president of IBM Academy of Technology. During his 30 years of practical experience in IBM, he's worked for financial, retail, and manufacturing clients on IT transformation projects of all sizes. Overall, he specializes in ensuring the technical success of complex IT projects that transform business models. He's currently advising clients on the cloud innovation roadmap from a technology and business perspective. So you saw from the intro video that the technology stream will cover a lot of ground, and we've arranged the first technology trend session into 3 distinct topics which we know will receive plenty of attention in the banking industry at the moment. So the first one we're going to look at is blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. So you can tell a lot about what banks think are important by looking at their announcements in the run-up to Cybos. And last week it was announced that there are now 20 global banks collaborating to build standards and working groups for this technology, and this includes Commerzbank. The second topic we're looking at is data analytics. This is, of course, a crucial topic. To my knowledge, nobody has been brave or silly enough to call for peak data so far. We at IDC fully expect that data analytics will drive the next level of user experience as the aim of personalization is delivered in an ever more impersonal way by the banking industry. And the final topic is mobile payments. So Apple Pay is but a few months old at this point. Android Pay is even newer. There are plenty of other contenders, but with a few exceptions, most of the running in this space has been made by non-banking outfits. So we'll be asking what the threats and the opportunities are to the existing banks from these disruptions and what they should be doing about it. Just finally, at the end, there'll be a chance for the audience to ask some questions. Don't leave us hanging. Start thinking now. And I'm sure that'll be valuable for everyone. Okay, so our first topic is the blockchain. And Stefan, it makes sense to start with you. So what's Commerzbank hoping to achieve in joining other global banks to collaborate on the blockchain?
I think there are several aspects why we have decided to join the consortium. I think one of it is I think normally if you would like to exploit new technology, it's better to do it together, not only by your own, sitting somewhere in the room. I think the second thing is if you're talking about technology, it's not the technology by itself, but it's about interoperability. So how do you get from an innovation to an invention? So what is the best timing for doing this? And I think you have also to do it across country, because if you're just doing that in Germany or in some other countries, it will be not enough. So to gain momentum, it's important for us to join with other partners.
Okay, so internally at Commerzbank, can you give a little bit of detail of the kind of preparatory work you're doing?
Yeah, I think what we have already done is to see what could be use cases for this kind of technology, which is not easy one because use cases normally should come along with a business case. So nowadays that's quite challenging, especially in the banking industry with a very tiny margin on the one hand, a great demand for equity capital on the other, and then a huge investment doing on the same time for technology. So use case is the one thing, and to add it with a business case is the next thing.
Okay, so I'll ask this to Susan as well. What are the best business cases you're seeing for blockchain?
I think if you take a look at the blockchain, where, just to add to what Stefan has said, in Singapore, I think there are a few banks who's looking to take a look at the traditional trade business, the trade finance business, where documents has to move. And back to the point where it was interesting was that you really need to collaborate and interoperate in order for it to maximize its use, right? Because there's supposed to be no central body looking after any of this authentication and all that. Now, how do we get it to interoperate? So if you take a look in Singapore, where we are a trade hub, there's lots of documents flowing across, right? All the different industries, from shipping to the import duties, the customs, and then the banks and the customers. Now, how do we get it all to work and then to have comfort that the documents that we are dealing with are real, right? So there is, to me, one use case. The trick is the business case, right? Where the margins are very low. But I guess the business case here would be, one, what is the loss when an actual fraud takes place and we then pay on the actual document, that entire chain of that commercial transaction. So, there are various ways of looking at it, I think.
Okay, so where's the impetus in Singapore coming from? Is there much going on at intra-bank or interbank level?
I think the banks are now trying to come together to take a look at all these new technologies, disruptive technologies, where we can collaborate and where we can, form competitive advantage. But specifically back to the blockchain topic that you're talking about, I think it needs a lot more collaboration for it to work and take off. But we certainly, as technologists, feel that there is a role in it. The question is, how do we make it to scale very quickly?
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps there's a role for Swift there. I'll bring Rashik in now. On the back office side, what kind of preparation do you think banks should be doing here? What kind of work is IBM doing there?
Yeah, so you've got to step back and understand what blockchain is really doing here. And blockchain is really about taking any process that spans multiple organizational boundaries and creating an open, distributed way of establishing a ledger in a trust-based way. And because the technologies are dispersed, you get a high level of security across that whole platform. So in terms of the banks now trying to get ready for that, they've got to understand what role they play in multi-organizational processes. Because the value and the opportunity for creating value is to try and identify the ways in which friction exists across the different processes, and friction in the form of fraud, as you said, friction in the form of inefficiencies. As those frictions get replaced by much slicker, much cleaner activities, and actually it starts to optimize the process and speed up the process, you get completely new value emerges. And so the opportunity for the bank here is to reimagine their role as the center for commerce that takes place in the commercial sense, and start to reimagine some of those commerce processes.
Okay, so we hear some of the issues there, and we hear some of the problems in maybe building a business case. Would you guys like to speculate how it actually might turn out over the next few years? Do you expect to see a takeoff here with the use of blockchain?
So, what do you predict?
It's always difficult to predict the future. It's always better to invent it. Okay, and so what we're trying to do is to say, as both Stefan and Susan said, this isn't going to happen as a single entity. It's going to have to be a collaborative venture, and we've been down this road before. It's about open collaborative platforms. It's about establishing standards, establishing trust, and a set of market structures which are sustainable. And so you'll see lots of open consortia. We've created our consortia that we're very much central to. Others are doing that. We'll see many people playing with this. And you've seen just how it's got the adoption is taking place with blockchain, with the whole Bitcoin structure itself. So the Bitcoin itself has proven the technology. It's how you now unpack that. And there are many underlying structures like Ethereum, like OpenRipple, and so on. So there's a number of structures out there. It's now how we commercialize that. How do we build sufficient confidence in the underlying technology that we're willing to invest? And how do we create those standards which make sure that the investment isn't something that's just one way, a short-term investment? It has that sustainability.
Yeah. And I think another aspect is because normally we are used to work in a hub and spoke system where the hub is a trustworthy party who has done all the security issues, who have done all the standardization work. And it's interesting how a distributed ledger structure could gain the same trust as we have it in a hub and spoke system. Absolutely. So that will also be a challenge besides the technology. Is it something where you could trust these kind of systems? Because at the end, moving money around, it's all about trust.
And I think the other part of it, which is also important, is the transparency. Yeah. Banks have got to start to re-establish trust by being much more transparent. And what Open Ledger does is it creates that level of transparency where everybody can see what's happening across the chain. And so for the whole fraud situation, for the AML position, you start to provide a lot more open platform there. And there's some very valuable use cases that you can see emerging from there.
So what is really interesting is, we talk about standards, right? And if you take a look at what banking as an industry that we do, payment standards, SWIFT, right? The industry for us to interoperate is a given. And in fact, fairly rule-based, which we are all used to. The issue is that once we move it out beyond the banking industry, like I said, what I find will be interesting will be the development of regulations. In each of the countries that we operate in, how does the law keep up with all these technology changes?
Yeah, okay, excellent. So just going back to the use cases, if you talk to some of the proponents of blockchain and some of the protocols and some of the virtual currencies around this, they talk about correspondent banking as an area that's kind of ripe for overhaul. I don't know if it's too sensitive to ask Susan and Stefan. Is that a particular pain point for banks, correspondent banking? Is it something you would like to see a lot of innovation in?
I think on the one hand, I think it's working quite good at the moment. It has been working quite good over the last 20 years. I think the question is, what are the expectations in the future? Because I think it's hard to explain at the moment why it takes so long to move money around. Everyone expected to be instantly there. We have all these instant payment things going on, different initiatives in the market, because the people are used to see it in seconds, to see the money flows. So I think, yes, have done it in the past very well, but I think we have to change it in the future.
Susan?
I think the Bitcoin is just an application, how it will evolve and everything else, because then you go back to currency and the underlying value of currency. That's a different topic altogether. Like what Stefan said, there's no reason why, other than the fact that we have to sleep 8 hours a day and we're working in different time zones. There's no reason why money cannot move a lot faster than what it should. Right? So that would be an interesting, I think, development because the end consumers today, the end users, that is our customers in the banking industry, are demanding far more. the instant generation is really here now, right? They don't understand why is it that when they order something, Amazon gets it the next day and the order is out, and why does bank takes forever to get the money across, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think we could probably agree that blockchain could well play an important role in this. Just last question before we move on. I'm sure that all banks are doing something or other with blockchain and distributed ledger, some kind of research at the very least. What advice would the three of you have, starting with Rashid, for what they should be focusing on?
As I said earlier, you've got to try and find use cases that are cross-organizational. And blockchain will only really be valuable where you have multiple organizations, multiple organization boundaries. So identify those where there is lots of friction across the organizational boundaries, and look at how you create value from removing that friction.
Okay.
For me, in the banking industry, we will have to continue to collaborate. I mean, just look at how technology has evolved in the last 10 years from wearables to whatever today. Goodness knows where everything will be. But I think the blockchain technology is one that is really fascinating because in the banking industry, it's really about community of trust. And how do we increase that level of trust as we connect is going to be key.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think what we have done in the past is that each bank spends billions of money in evolving something where you could much better collaborate. I think SWIFT is a very good example. There's a non-competition area where it really makes sense to join the forces, because otherwise, if you have a look at the Dodd-Frank, EMIR, all these regulatory things, if you have a look at all these compliance things coming up, I think there's so much room of non-competitive collaboration, which we have as an industry to join our forces to do that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Stefan. It's nice last word. I'm sure it's music to Swift's ears. Message of collaboration. So the second topic that we have is data analytics and personalization and how it affects user experience. I want to start by asking Rashid, in general terms, how good do you think the banking industry is at actually making use of data and analyzing it at present?
Yeah, so it's a very broad and open question, of course. So the way I think about the question is banks intrinsically are people who understand data. Bankers are really data-driven, evidence-driven, and they really represent the cream of the community around data. So you'd expect them to be good at using data. So I set the standard very high and expect banks to be very high there. So that starting point, are we making enough use of the data? And you hear all these stats of we're using less than 20% of the data that we have. I don't think banks are as bad as that. I think banks are generally very good users of the data. But are they doing enough with it? I don't think so. There are many, many areas that I know we could do a lot more with the data. And we see the advances in things like machine learning and cognitive technologies, which mean that we can bring parts of the data that we haven't been using into the equation. And so I think there's plenty of opportunity to do that. And as I think through the challenges, one of the biggest challenges that we face is this notion of creepiness and ethics around the use of the data. So how do we make sure we use the data and understanding what purpose the data was gathered for, and how do we then expose the data to the consumer, whether it's a partner bank or whether it's an end consumer, in a way in which they see the value. At the same time, they're not surprised that we're doing that. And that's a trick that we've got to play, and it's a non-trivial challenge, but we have to do that. But there are many, many other challenges around regulation and ethics. It's a very big, broad, open question. But are we doing enough? No, we're pretty good, I think.
Yeah, okay. So Susan and Stefan, without getting too personal, how far along this path do you think you guys are?
I think just to add Rashid's point, there is a lot of data. The question is whether there's enough skills within the industry to mine the data. Like Rashid was saying, we probably do a very good job in using the data in a very traditional way. If you think consumer banking uses the data the most, right? Because they had to portfolio manage, they do credit scoring. We use it for a lot of risk purposes, like in markets, looking at market risk and so on. But turning it around and adding value and putting ourselves in the consumer, what makes sense? And I don't think customers comes in first thing in the morning to go to banking. The first thing they go to do is something on lifestyle, right? What do you want to eat today in Singapore? If you are visiting Singapore, you'll find that we are all foodies. We love to eat. So the first thing in our mind is what we're going to have lunch for lunch today, and whom am I going to meet for lunch? So you don't go to a bank the first thing in the morning. So for us, that's a challenge in the bank. So how do we use analytics in such a way that as they are moving and enjoying their life, that they think of the bank, right? So how do you use that? And we have actually a lot of data on their lifestyle, where they've been, what they've eaten, what we've paid, which house they are, where do they live. But as Rashid says, do we have the skills to mine that? How do we mine that? And I think the likes of all the service providers online provide a lot more in terms of how they look at the consumer, which is not natural to banking. And I think that's going to be the real challenge. The real challenge is not the data. The real challenge is how do we use it.
So when you talk about skills, are you talking about software tools or actually the staff within the bank? And is there a lot of skilling that needs to be done?
I think we need to hire a lot more non-banking people into banking to really think outside the box, to look at, besides the constraints of the law and everything else, but to look at how we can use the data a lot more. Because I think we are all traditionally trained in the banking domain. We look at risk, right?
Yeah,
we look at a business case,
exactly.
we look at whatever, and so on, right?
And I think what has also changed is that in the past we have to deal with structured data. Now we have to combine it with unstructured data, which also means a huge impact on the underlying technology, because normally we are used to use relational databases. Now we are using techniques like Hadoop. That changes. We are used to, let's say, store data on tapes. Now we do it in memory. We have all these business intelligence tools working quite well. So I think the underlying technology is saying, so you need the technology skill on the one hand, and as you said, you need also have a different view on how to look at the data and how to deal with data. Yeah.
So Stefan, as a bank in Germany, there are some legislative peculiarities. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of constraints that Commerzbank faces in exploiting customer data to the max?
Yeah, I think in Germany we are I will not say most paranoid about data, but I think that's something true about that. I will not judge on that. It has its positive and I think its negative side. So it's always a challenge for us to use the data for marketing purpose. It's not a problem if you use them for risk. So and we have to be very careful because our clients are frightened off if they got the impression that we are spying on them. So there's a value of data which they accept, but for banks they are a little bit more reluctant. So I always says the people are more willing to spend to send their data on Facebook and to be quite open with that than to give them to their bank. So it's still something where even young people are very reluctant to be open on their bank account.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, if the young people are sitting in the audience, to be honest, I can't see too many of them, but how would you explain to them why using their data would improve their services? I mean, what are the big benefits before we round this off?
Yeah. I think the big benefits I see is that you could make much more better offers to the customers. We have just made an experiment where we find out which of our customers are using solar panels on their roof, and we have just offered them a fund to invest, where the fund by itself invests also in solar energy. And that was quite an amazing match, because normally you have 2 or 3% result of such a marketing campaign. There it was over 25% where the people really sign. And this is something which is value for both, because we don't have to spend a fortune on all these marketing campaigns, and on the other hand, you don't bother the customer with offers he don't like.
Okay, and Susan, what's the OB doing to really try and connect with its customers?
So you've heard what Stefan talked about, the technology. I mean, that's the interesting part, I think, for all of us who are in the technology field, that there's constant changes and evolution. But I think in working with our business partners here, particularly in Singapore, right, where we are also one of the financial centers, when you take a look at data analytics, there are a few areas. One is in marketing, like I said. So with our businesses, we're looking now, not even the unstructured data. Even in the little, we call small data now, right? Because that's big data and this is small data. When we take a look at the small data, like I said, we know exactly where the customer has been, where he has eaten, when he has last spent on his card, and so on. Now, how do we get value out of that? That's what we are creating at this point in time. So we're really not going into traditional banking, like trying to look at solar panels and everything else and all that. Because we feel that if we don't get into that space on their mind share that we provide value in their lifestyle, we will be disintermediated by others who will, right? So that's one area. The other area that we are really looking at, and I suspect, I think in one of the technology streams, really in analytics, is in security. You know, with the commingling of AML monitoring that we have to do, KYC monitoring that we have to do, with cybersecurity, with internal fraud, and so on and so forth. There's a lot more data now out there. How do we now triangulate all that to make sense? That is really, you know, data analytics at its best, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Last word to Rashik. There's some banks doing some really interesting things with Watson and this kind of thing. So what's the ultimate in personalization from data analytics to you? What does it look like?
So personalization, I think, has multiple attributes. The first one is really deriving what matters for the individual. So distilling the information to be able to understand what the person cares about. And right now, if you imagine where we're at in terms of technology, it's not too difficult to take somebody's Twitter feed and be able to derive a psychometric index for that individual. And in fact, we did that when I was the Academy President. We did that for 100 of our Academy members. And it was staggering to find that just taking a couple hundred tweets for the individuals and then also asking them to do a 2-hour psychometric profile, the accuracy was just unbelievable, between 80 to 95% accurate compared to a 2-hour test. And so being able to know what that individual cares about, what their underlying values are, the kind of language that they like to be able to be, well, they'll respond to, right? They like to be talked to in this kind of way, means that you can personalize interactions at a level that you can't imagine. So at one end of the spectrum, we've got the ability to really get to know the individual, in some cases know them better than they know themselves, which kind of gets a bit scary, but we're kind of there. At the other end of the spectrum, it's trying to understand not the needle in the haystack, but actually understanding the haystack. How do we actually understand some of the themes that come along? And we're all familiar with the beer and the nappies analogy. That's just one out of, I think, millions of those kind of analogies out there. And as you start to look at the wealth of data that exists inside the bank, how do we distill those into some of the patterns that we wouldn't have imagined ourselves? How do we start to build some of that discovery? And matching that discovery with the understanding of the individual, I think, is the opportunity that comes forward. And so we will see more and more of that. I think you'll find more and more capability comes in the technology to allow us to do some of that. And the importance of the bank is then to say, okay, if I do discover that there's a linkage between somebody's values and something that we see as a theme inside the data, how do I translate that into real value for the bank? And how do I translate it in a way which doesn't break the ethical expectations of the individual, but at the same time creates a magical experience where that individual will want to go and talk to friends about what the bank just did for me. The banks did something really fantastic because of the PVs and the way they do the linkage of my values around sustainability and the way they do the loans. Or it might be around somebody who's a petrol head and they create a linkage between a particular petrol head event, Grand Prix or whatever, and what they do. So it's matching their values with the offers which make sense to them. And I think that's where we're headed.
Okay, excellent. Right, so the next topic is mobile payments, and we left it till last because I've found at conferences recently that once you get onto a topic, you can't really get off it again very easily. I'll start by asking all of you guys, is the banking industry still in control of its own destiny when it comes to mobile payments, or has it somehow missed the boat a little bit here?
May I start from a, let's say, European perspective, and maybe you could add it then from an Asian perspective. I think one of the disadvantages is if you have done something good in the past, that does not mean that you do it good in the future. Because you have, especially in Germany, I think we have a very high sophisticated payment scheme in the past developed due to the high labor costs. And there's no such a high need at the moment in the market to take the next step because the people are much more satisfied. We don't get so much pressure as then you have it maybe from Scandinavian point of view or what you see in the Asian world. So I always said we have to be careful. I think the former couch or carriage manufacturers was also not the future car manufacturers. So to have it done good in the past does not mean that you are the one who delivers this kind of service in the future. So I think it's a critical step where we are at the moment, and we have to see how much we would like to invest in this area, because as I said, it's not so easy to go through the next step. If you, the business case always said, I will lose money otherwise, because it's a typical business case we have at the moment. It's more a threatening case. It's not a case of opportunity.
Okay, so once again, it's questions around the business case. How about Susan? How about in Singapore and East Asia?
I think it's a very interesting point Stefan has made, that your past successes doesn't mean you continue to succeed in the future. And a point in time is I sit on the NETS board in Singapore as well, and it's a consortium of banks. They came together to make payments possible. So if you are Singaporean or permanent resident here and have local banks or 6 other banks, you could really transact on your bank account in all the shopping areas or buy whatever it is. The question is, how do we bring it online, right? And the online space, I think what's really interesting is that you have the, I think, early generation where they try to come in and do payments to create to break the pain points like PayPal for cross online payments. But now increasingly, I think, like everybody has mentioned, right, Samsung Pay and Apple Pay, what does it mean? And you have then Visa, who's coming, to say, what is Visa going to be? Because Visa, the credit card could be replaced by the phone. And who owns the devices, right? So I think there is a divide in the sense that the Apple owns the device to the last mile. And in traditional banking, if you think about in a traditional world just 10 years ago, right? Most of the banks own the last mile, which is the point of sale at the terminal, which is the branches, the ATMs that we have that's in there. But that last mile is increasingly being overtaken by a device whom we hold dear. I think if you lose your wallet, or you left your wallet at home, you would just leave it at home, right? But if you left your phone at home, you will run back and pull it back. So that device becomes that very, very important device. So right now, as we speak, there is a great debate within UOB. How should we now deal with this? Asia is slightly different from let's say America, where I think there is, a dominance, of Apple. But here we have China coming up with their devices. You have Samsung coming in. We have also Apple. So for us as a bank, where we don't own all these devices, and these are all the technology innovations that's going on, how do we stay relevant? So how would payment evolve, right? And if you take a look today, if you go in and you have lots of wallets that you can download, where would wallets evolve? Where would cards evolve? And how the devices will interpay? The thing is that what we are discovering is that we don't want to just be the middleman to make sure the money gets in between. Right? But how do we get the whole value chain, which includes not just the consumer, but the merchants as our customers, and how do we package the whole thing together? That currently is a debate that is going on. And I think we're all struggling. I think for those who are specifically supporting the consumer business, even more so.
Yeah, so do you think that banks are maybe in a slightly stronger position to negotiate here if there is a multiplicity of possible schemes coming on stream?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Apple is a very interesting development in the sense that I think if you take a look at what happened in the US, is that they really plunked themselves right in the middle of the ecosystem and they says, I'll take a share of the interchange. I think in this part of the world, we have so many players, right, that's coming in. We also have a lot of dominant domestic point of sale networks that's coming through. I think and how Visa is now posturing in that ecosystem is a very interesting development. I don't think the conclusion is there yet, what it should be. But as banks in this part of the world, and I think all of us struggle, is to say how do we be partners and yet create value.
So we struggle to answer it. Do you have any suggestions? Do you have any feelings for where the future might lie?
I think the future will be smaller margins for the business. I think in most markets now, I think customers are getting more sophisticated, and you have, to some extent, I think there's some disintermediation that's happening in there. I'm not sure in Europe how that is developing.
Yeah, I think for us it's very important to become really relevant for the consumer on his mobile. We always call it, we have to be part of his boring space, because boring space we define that you are waiting in front of a lift, taking the lift for a couple of minutes you up, and does he really make use then of the banking app, or does he make use of Facebook, Twitter and so on? And we make some studies how to get in there, because you are not relevant if you are not in this boring space. The same as if you are, it's the same as if you are waking up in the morning. Are you one of the apps everyone using in the morning? In the morning you have 5 to 10 apps which you normally start in the morning to look at. And I think we have to deliver a lot of relevant information to the consumer. So normally I check my bank account once a day. So we have once a day access to the consumer. And that is something I think we leverage not very well at the moment.
Okay, so we're probably getting back to the data analytics and the personalization there as well. Rashik, would you like to chime in? From a back office perspective, once again, what kind of things do you think banks should be focusing on here to move forward in mobile payments?
Yeah, so ultimately, I think Stefan hit the nail on the head, which is how do you get the customer's attention and really provide something that inspires them, so motivates them, interests them, right? And ultimately, people are human. So it's got to be tied to their human needs and desires. And Facebook does that very well because it's about their friends and so on. Same thing with Twitter and all the social media. But for the back office, there is quite a significant shift here, which is all about the tokenization. And the battleground here is, what is the token service provider? How does that token service provider work? How do we do the reconciliations? There's quite a significant back office overhaul that needs to take place to be able to support these networks. And as you have a range of these standards, whether it's an Apple Pay or a Google Pay or a Samsung Pay or Fred Pay or whatever Pay, you're going to have to support these. And that tokenization service that you start to establish will have to cope with that. And whether you use a third-party provider, whether Visa handles that, there's a big open discussion, right? That's a massive topic. But at the same time, how do we start to leverage the insight we get from the tokenization? And the tokenization is really great because it starts to remove some of the barriers around fraud. So some of the opportunities of fraud get reduced. You start to have the ability to control loss of data and intrusions in a very different, very effective way. So the value is massive if it can be done right. But at the same time, can you leverage that data, as Susan was saying, to a point where that data that you've got allows you to create something of magical experience to the client, right? It's that magical experience that's going to, and you've got to do this every day. Just because you've done it once is not enough. It's got to be done every day in a consistent way, which surprises and motivates the user to want to stay with you.
And I think there's also a very interesting technology question behind that, because nowadays we have to bring the people together. On the one hand, the web designer, but a lot of the data we are offering are somewhere in the mainframe system.
Yes.
So the variety, we have to go from the web design to the mainframe system, bring together these nice and fancy guys doing all these web things, Java, HTML5, and on the other hand, to align them together with the COBOL developers. Right. So this is quite a challenge. And I'm very careful, because often it's said we have the two pieces of IT, but I think that's not the question. You have to align these people and to work them together, because as a bank we have our legacy. I can't neglect it. It's there, and it will be there the next 10 years. And I think we have to deal with this kind of technology, because otherwise all the other companies who have not this legacy in place will somehow be faster than we are.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think just drawing on that point, that this whole notion of two-speed IT is one that I think we've done a disservice to the industry by bringing that term in, quite frankly. What's actually happened, I think, is over the last 50 years of IT, we've been building very structured, logical systems, which are being optimized to achieve levels of efficiency. And you can liken that to the left brain, so very well structured, very well thought through. And what we're now seeing is the emergence of technology which helps from the right brain side. So a lot of the Java developers, the front-end developers, are starting to understand context, unstructured data, all those kind of things, and pattern matching. And it's how you blend those two things to start to have a bank which isn't just left brain and very logical, but also is right brain, so it's a whole brain bank. So this notion of a joined-up bank where we have, we're making much more whole mind decisions on what matters to the individual. And I think that's where we're actually heading. And it's a fascinating topic which I'm working on right now, but I think that's where we're trying to head.
Yeah.
And as you said, we've got to bring those two together. We've got to leverage the value from both of those sides to be able to get those magical experiences for the client.
Okay, thank you. So we've just got a couple of minutes left, and it's a good opportunity to ask for some questions from anyone. We have a question here in the middle.
You discussed the three main topics about blockchain, analytics, and mobile. In, let's say, from a current business as usual use case. I mean, they picked each of them. What about your views by thinking at the intersection between the three main topics, the blockchain, the analytics, and the mobile? Which are the use cases or the transformation trends that you're seeing when bringing the three together?
So I think if I understood it right, we're asking how do the three topics combine? Is that? Mm-hmm. So I think we've seen from the answers for particularly big data and analytics fades into both of the other topics and lots of others as well. But can you guys see any examples of where all three topics are applicable to the same?
So let me try and take that one. So I'm going to shamelessly plug my HBR article I published last year. In there, I talk about 5 patterns for the business model evolution. And ultimately, this is about redefining the business model for different aspects of the bank. And those business models are made possible because those 3 things come together. So as you start to get more data from the real world, whether it's through smarter products or whatever, that gives you the new data. The new data then lets you to find new ways of creating new value. At the same time, you can start to reimagine your service as a digitized service and offered through the web. So rather than try and answer it right now, I'd go and ask you to read my article.
Honestly, I think there's a different maturity level we have within these 3 topics. I think mobile and data analytics is already there. It's used. With blockchain, I would say it's somewhere in the Gartner hype cycle at the beginning. We don't know where it's ends. We all know these different kind of evolutions, how that could proceed. So I think data analytics and mobile, that fits quite together. But I think with the blockchain, we have to see where we will end up.
Susan?
Yeah, I think Stefan said it very
Okay, anyone else? There's a question over there.
Thank you. I've got a question on the blockchain technology. That's one big trend that we see. The other one is instant payments, already mentioned by the forum here. How can they be compatible? Given the... slow technology that blockchain is at the moment?
You mean to use blockchain technology for instant payment, or? Yeah. That's something we are looking at the moment, but it's not our main focus at the moment, to be honest. We are more looking in the regulatory space. We are looking more in the securities, OTC area. So it could have also could be a solution also in the payments areas, but regarding instant payments, we are much more looking in different directions because you have always to see what's going on with the settlement, with the clearing, and how we break this chain in these different categories. So payments might be a possibility to make use of blockchain, but at the moment that's not our focus within Commerzbank.
Yeah, if I just, and I completely support you on that point, I think payments are really about moving real definitions of cash around where we see blockchain and other kind of like Bitcoin type structures it's basically a property. And movement of property has intrinsically a level of underlying structure which won't be as fast as regular payment structures. So I don't see that really becoming the faster payments at the moment. Who knows about the future, but that's where we see right now.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this a little bit, right? Where I think if you take a look at the organization like SWIFT, Visa, and all that, it existed because we take a central party, we create an ecosystem of trust, and then for which we operate. That's how payments actually works, be it whether it's instant payments, credit cards, or anything else. The question is, with the blockchain, I think, if I take that question further on, is what role would these organizations that created centers of trust, would they still exist, continue to exist? Or would it become service providers for all of us who doesn't have the scale in technology and then create a lot more that we can do? I think it's going to be one where, like you said, the maturity of the technology and how we develop the use case that will determine how they will, I think, commingle in the future. Yeah.
Okay, time's up. Thank you very much to the panel. Thanks everyone for listening.
Question, I think.
Do we have time for one more question? No, sorry, we're done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.